The sun dipped low over Dallas Love Field Airport, painting the tarmac in shades of amber and gold. Business travelers shuffled through the bustling terminal, some clutching phones, others dragging rolling bags that bumped over the tiles. Among them was Nathan Carter, a man whose life had been built on calculated success, standing tall in a tailored navy suit. The sharp crease of his trousers reflected the precision he demanded in all things. Nathan glanced at his first-class ticket, smirking faintly. First class wasn't just a convenience for him. It was a declaration of his place in the world. He strode toward Gate 14, his expensive leather shoes tapping a steady rhythm against the floor. A flight to Los Angeles was just another routine part of his schedule, another step in a never-ending pursuit of more. As the flight attendants called for first-class boarding, Nathan stepped forward, exuding an air of entitlement. His sharp eyes darted to the other passengers joining the line, quickly assessing their worth, or lack thereof. He paid special attention to a man just a few steps behind him. The man was about Nathan's height but broader, with a calm confidence that seemed almost out of place. His outfit was strikingly simple, a plain black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. To Nathan, it was far too casual for first class. Must have won a ticket in a raffle, he muttered under his breath. Smirking to himself, Nathan boarded the plane and quickly found his seat by the window. He leaned back, letting the comfort of first class wrap around him, and watched as others filed in. To his surprise, the casually dressed man stopped right next to him, glancing at the seat number before storing his carry-on in the overhead bin. Nathan stiffened as the man sat down, taking the aisle seat beside him. For a moment, neither said a word. Nathan's jaw clenched as he fought the urge to say something. Instead, he pulled out his tablet, tapping away at emails. But he couldn't help side-eyeing his new seatmate. The man, seemingly unfazed, adjusted his seatbelt and took out a book. Nathan squinted at the title. It wasn't a bestseller he recognized, nor did it seem like light reading. Of course, Nathan thought, trying to look intellectual. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, offering pre-departure drinks. When they reached Nathan's row, the attendant addressed the man first. "Good evening, Mr. Sinclair," she said with a warm smile. "Can I get you anything to drink before takeoff?" Nathan blinked, startled by the familiarity in her tone. Mr. Sinclair politely declined, thanking her with an easy smile that somehow felt effortless. Nathan glanced at the book again and noticed the embossed name on the cover. Sinclair. The gears in his mind turned, but he brushed it off. Surely it was nothing significant. Still, there was something about the man's presence that unsettled him. He didn't know it yet, but this flight would be anything but routine. As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Nathan's irritation grew. The man beside him, Sinclair, as the book's cover suggested, seemed utterly unbothered by his surroundings. He read with quiet focus, occasionally pausing to jot notes in the margins. Meanwhile, Nathan's tablet screen glowed, emails piling up like bricks in a wall of self-importance. The silence between them was tense, at least from Nathan's perspective. He cleared his throat loudly, hoping to draw attention, but Sinclair didn't so much as glance up. Annoyed, Nathan decided to break the ice, though his words carried the sharp edge of condescension. "Looks like you got lucky with this seat," Nathan said, his voice dripping with artificial politeness. Sinclair looked up, offering a polite but neutral smile. "Excuse me? I mean, first class isn't usually this casual," Nathan said, gesturing subtly towards Sinclair's hoodie. "But hey, I suppose everyone deserves to treat themselves once in a while." The comment hung in the air, heavy with implication. A couple of passengers across the aisle glanced over, their expressions a mix of discomfort and curiosity. Sinclair closed his book slowly, his movements deliberate. "That's one way to look at it," he said evenly. His tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable weight behind his words, as if he were deciding whether this conversation was worth pursuing. Nathan, emboldened by what he perceived as a lack of resistance, chuckled. "Don't get me wrong. I'm all for people experiencing a little luxury. It's just not everyone's used to it. You know? Makes things feel different." He gave a knowing smile. as if he were sharing a secret with someone who couldn't possibly understand. The quiet response came unexpectedly. "Different isn't always a bad thing," Sinclair said. Nathan leaned back slightly, taken aback by the response. Before he could reply, the flight attendant returned with drinks for the row. She handed Nathan his sparkling water before turning to Sinclair. "Mr. Sinclair, are you sure I can't get you anything? It's no trouble at all." Her tone was deferential, almost reverent. Nathan's brow furrowed. Why was she so attentive to this man? He glanced around, noticing other flight attendants stealing quick glances at Sinclair as they moved through the cabin. The tension in Nathan's chest tightened, but his ego demanded he keep control of the situation. "Well," Nathan said, forcing a grin, "I guess you're a regular." Then, the sarcasm was thinly veiled. Sinclair didn't take the bait. "You could say that," he replied, his voice measured. But the flight attendant's next words shattered Nathan's thinly built facade. "Mr. Sinclair, if there's anything you need during the flight, just let me or any of the crew know. We're happy to accommodate." Her smile lingered before she walked away, leaving Nathan stunned. His curiosity turned to unease. Who exactly was this man? But Nathan wasn't ready to back down just yet. His pride wouldn't allow it, even as cracks began to form in his assumptions. As the flight leveled out at cruising altitude, Nathan's mind raced. Determined to reassert his perceived superiority, he leaned over, wearing his signature business smile, the kind that masked his disdain under a thin veneer of charm. "So," he began, his voice light as if they were old acquaintances, "what do you do?" Sinclair didn't look up right away. He finished writing a note in the margin of his book, closed it carefully, and placed it on the tray table. Then, meeting Nathan's gaze with an unreadable expression, he said, "I work in management." "Management?" Nathan echoed, his smile tightening. It was a vague answer, and he knew it. "That's great. Lots of opportunity in that field. Small business, I assume?" Sinclair tilted his head slightly, as if assessing the intent behind the question. "Something like that," he said, his tone polite but noncommittal. Nathan chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, good for you. It's nice to see someone breaking barriers. You know." He leaned back, satisfied with his thinly veiled compliment. But Sinclair didn't react as expected. Instead of gratitude, he simply regarded Nathan for a moment, his calm demeanor unwavering. "Breaking barriers," he repeated, his voice steady. Interesting choice of words. Nathan felt a flicker of irritation. The man wasn't taking the bait, wasn't playing into the narrative Nathan had constructed in his mind. It made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't quite articulate why. The tipping point came when another flight attendant approached their row. She wasn't carrying drinks or snacks. She carried a handwritten note on airline stationery. She handed it to Sinclair with a warm smile. "Compliments of the captain," she said before disappearing back down the aisle. Nathan couldn't hide his curiosity any longer. "Friend of the captain, huh?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Sinclair glanced at the note, his expression neutral. "You could say that," he replied, then folded the paper neatly and tucked it into his pocket without another word. Nathan clenched his jaw, his frustration growing. This man, this enigma, wasn't just sitting in first class. He was commanding the space in a way Nathan couldn't, and it was driving him mad. But Nathan had no idea that the answer to his questions was closer and more shocking than he could have imagined. About halfway through the flight, the head flight attendant approached their row. She carried herself with the poise of someone who'd been in the business for years, but now wore an expression that bordered on nervous excitement. Stopping just short of Sinclair, she smiled widely. "Mr. Sinclair," she said with a slight bow of her head, "the captain asked me to extend his personal greetings and to thank you for flying with us today." Nathan's eyebrows shot up. The captain was thanking this man? For what? "Thank you," Sinclair replied graciously, his tone steady as always. "I appreciate the hospitality." The flight attendant lingered a moment, her gaze flickering to Nathan before returning to Sinclair. "If there's anything at all we can do to make your flight more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask." Nathan couldn't hold back any longer. "Excuse me," he interjected, his voice carrying just enough edge to draw attention. Is there something I'm missing here? Who exactly is this gentleman? The flight attendant hesitated, glancing at Sinclair, who gave a subtle nod as if granting permission. She smiled tightly and said, Mr. Sinclair is the CEO of Sinclair Enterprises. He's also one of our airline's largest shareholders. The words landed like a punch to Nathan's gut. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He stared at the man beside him, who was now casually returning to his book, as if the announcement had no significance at all. For a moment, the cabin seemed to close in around Nathan. The tension he'd been nursing turned into a sickening knot in his stomach. He replayed every dismissive remark, every condescending smile, and felt them rebound back at him with crushing force. The rest of the flight passed in relative silence. Nathan occasionally glanced at Sinclair, who had returned to his book, but he didn't dare interrupt again. Instead, he found himself reflecting on the subtle lesson he'd just been handed. It wasn't just about Sinclair. It was about the way Nathan viewed the world, the assumptions he made without realizing, and the quiet harm those assumptions could cause. As the passengers disembarked, Nathan lingered, letting others file out first. He watched as Sinclair exited the plane, greeted warmly by an airline representative waiting at the gate. Nathan sighed, pulling his bag from the overhead bin. He wasn't proud of how he'd acted, but maybe, just maybe, he could use this as a turning point. Sometimes, the most important lessons aren't the ones you expect. They're the ones that force you to confront yourself.